I want to start with a general idea of where I think science is. Number one, why I think, and we can argue over this if science is in a different spot than it used to be, and I would argue that it is. I'll tell you why I think that is. I'll tell you about three things that I think make things more complicated. A, the weirdness that is our brain, the weirdness that is our current information environment, and the weirdness that is the scientific community, and who not only sometimes are not doing what they're supposed to do, but sometimes are doing what they're not supposed to do, and absolutely not helping. And then I want to end with a couple of thoughts, and this is where I want to spend more time because I think it's actually important on how we best do this down the road. So let me start with why I think science is in a weird spot, or in a weirder spot than it's been in the past. Some of you have seen this picture before. This is actually up here. You have Hiram Smith Hall, you have Ag Hall, and you have a bunch of people with a cow, and a bunch of people somewhere in the early days of this university. Why am I putting this here? Because the very idea of land grants, of course, of A&Ms, of extension, in particular an extension for a long time having done a really good job of doing exactly that, and that is if you read the Morrill Act or the congressional language leading up to the Morrill Act, which is why we have land grants partly, the language actually said we need to not just do this research, we need to, and direct quote, tell farmers to grow or teach farmers rather to grow 2 blades of grass instead of 1. Meaning it's not just doing the research that increases crop yields or leads to better societal outcomes, it's actually us taking that research and translating it into societal benefits. That idea is a great idea, was a great idea, deserved to be true. Unfortunately, it's directly at odds with where most of public opinion is. If you look at data from the Pew Foundation, this is a few years old, but it hasn't changed fundamentally. This is not people not believing in evolution. This is not people not believing in climate change or in the Big Bang. This is people thinking that scientists, every dark blue line that you see here is a percentage of the general public thinking that the scientific community is still not, that the science is not settled, that the scientific community is still unsure or divided on issues surrounding the Big Bang, meaning how our universe started, climate change, and evolution. So clearly there is a disconnect between what happens within the ivory tower and what happens and how the ivory tower is seen. And again, this is not people's own opinions, this is their opinions about the scientific community. So we are in this funny spot, and we're in this funny spot partly because we screwed it up for a long time. What we're operating from, and this is just the most recent example, some of you have seen this, Food Evolution, a movie that makes a very scientifically credible argument for why GMOs are something that we really need to invest in and is worth our effort, our attention, both societally and scientifically. But you can already see the tagline, feasting on facts. Why is that so important? Because instinctively all of us keep coming back to this idea that if we just teach people more science, people will make better choices. Right? This is the general idea. And I maybe unfairly so put Neil deGrasse Tyson here, but he certainly stands for this idea. The idea that he, of course, is right, he's a scientist, he will tell people the way it is, and then ideally a mic drop at the end, right, there is no more discussion, this is it. And if you don't believe in GMOs, you're an idiot. And here's all the facts why you're wrong. The problem with that, and this is why it's somewhat funny and somewhat depressing, it's actually directly at odds with the science itself. We know from decades of the social science that just throwing facts at people at best doesn't do anything, and at worst leads to backfire effects or other things, boomerang effects, meaning people dig in even further. So that's problem number one. It is not, the social science just doesn't suggest that this is how it works. But problem number two is that actually focusing on the facts doesn't acknowledge the complexity of most modern science. Most modern science, the questions that arise have nothing to do with the factual issues surrounding it. They have something to do with values that may be challenged. If we do research on embryos, if we edit the human genome in ways that's heritable, and so on and so forth. And so focusing on facts gives all the perfect answers to questions that people didn't ask, and avoids giving answers to all the questions that people do ask. So that's what this next slide is all about, or that's what this next slide is all about, the idea that ultimately science has gotten really good, and I think the community has gotten really good at answering technical questions on new science, off-target effects for CRISPR, whatever else. What we haven't really gotten good at, and we've avoided, is the question about the ethics, or are the questions about the ethics, the moral questions, and so on. Just a few examples, and I know I've showed these in 902. Most police departments in this country, many major metro police departments in this country, in London, in other parts of the world, use AI to predict the likelihood of people committing crime based on social media traffic, based on what you do, and so on. So basically machines start making predictions, algorithms start making predictions about how likely, given your location, given your social networks, you are to commit a crime. And we engage in preemptive policing, right? We pull people over for minor traffic violations because we know, not because their blinker is out or their turn signal is out, but because we know that the machine has told us they're likely to do this. One of those, Palantir, developed by Peter Thiel, who many of you know as a big donor to the Trump campaign and co-founder of PayPal. We're using these things without anybody having the slightest clue that we're using them. And not anybody, but a vast majority of the general public doesn't know that these things are being used, meaning most of these technologies arrive without us having a large societal debate around it. Instead, they arrive pretty quickly, and then we start having debates once people find out that they are being used. The problem with that is that a lot of them, as I said, challenge deeply held values and belief systems. This is an embryo, pig embryo, that's being developed at the Salk Institute out in California, where one genetic marker gets turned off and gets injected with human stem cells and then grows a human organ in the pig. A human organ, of course, that's tailored directly toward the human that it's going to be transplanted into, which means there's a much lower likelihood of rejection when it gets transplanted. We work around the idea that many of us don't want to donate organs and so on. But we're growing a human organ in a pig. This is a chimeric embryo, two beings together, right? You can already see the host of questions. Muslim populations not being able to accept an organ that comes from a pig, or other religions for that matter. What if we start growing brains in a pig? Does that pig then have a consciousness? Is that, how do we consent? And so on and so forth. Those sound like weird, off-the-wall questions, but they're really not. And I usually, at this point in discussions, full disclosure, I have zero religious beliefs. I just don't have a religious bone in my body, but I fully understand what the moral concerns are about putting things like this together and where some of the concerns may be coming from, but you also clearly see the benefits. And even for things that, of course, all of us understand will be here eventually, and to some degree in Teslas and other already here, self-driving cars. The idea that we teach these cars morality, that AI teaches them morality, that they're not making situational choices, or they have to make rather situational choices based on algorithmic input. This is research at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon as well, where researchers try to figure out how to hack the signs that these cars, of course, all have to read, right? The neural networks that read, interpret the environment. Look at this. All of us know this is a stop sign. They spent a lot of effort on this, so it's not easy to do this, but it is possible to turn this sign by putting a couple black stickers, a couple white stickers, and turn this into a sign that most cars interpret as a 45-mile-an-hour sign. So you can see where that gets really awkward at a four-way stop, right? Where the self-driving car just goes right through. And more than once have we seen in Phoenix, Arizona, and other places where self-driving cars are everywhere because they're so deregulated, cars running over humans. Not because they didn't recognize the human as human. They ran them over anyway because of some mistake. And eventually, we will tell parents that they're going to go out and purchase a product for their children that is in a very small slice of circumstances designed to kill them. Period. That will be the most moral choice, is to crash your kid in the wall. Because there's going to be a kindergarten class, there's another group of people, and you go out on black ice, and the only way to minimize casualties is to kill the driver. That is a moral choice. It's one that I would like to think that I would make as well. I'm pretty certain I wouldn't. Crash myself into a wall. But the car would make that choice for me. So long story short, all these technologies are exciting, they're useful, but they all raise questions where we all see kind of, well, that there's different pathways forward, and this is what some people have described as wicked problems. One pathway forward is to say, look, we shouldn't do this at all because of the downsides for self-driving cars, for preemptive policing. Another pathway is to say we need to regulate it heavily, and so on and so forth. None of them is right, none of them is wrong. They all require societal debates, which is why Alan Leshner, who was for a long time CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and almost ended up running the Primate Research Center here at Wisconsin, but his wife vetoed the winters, and so he didn't stay after a year. But he has called for this open bidirectional dialogue again and again and said, we need to not just have a dialogue about how exciting this is, we need to have a dialogue about the downsides, the perils, the pitfalls of these new things. And he said this easily now 15 years back, probably 17 years back. So with a lot of foresight to where we are. But that dialogue is not that easy to have. That's the problem. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time on those three things, human nature being the most important one. And when I talk about human nature, I don't mean to talk about human nature in the sense that there's a bunch of people who don't believe in that scientists have reached consensus on Big Bang, or there's a bunch of conservatives that don't believe in climate change, or a bunch of liberals who don't like to vaccinate their children. I mean all of us. I mean human nature, every single person in this room, including myself, of course. And the one thing that for those of you in 902, you've done extensive readings on this. For everybody else who works in science communication, this is something that should be on your radar, if it's not already, and it probably is. It's the idea of motivated reasoning. And the best setup, or not the best setup, but for me, a good way to think about this is to give you, for example, the scenario around embryonic stem cell research, something that we've spent a lot of time and money on in Wisconsin, and continue to. This is George Bush, 43, with a snowflake baby. This is a baby that is basically an adopted fertilized egg from IVF. So when you do IVF, you have these fertilized eggs, they get implanted, and hopefully you don't have to try it all too often. It's a really expensive procedure, but usually there's leftover embryos, fertilized embryos. It's been a long discussion what to do with them, discard them, parents freeze them, parents give them up for research, and that's where a lot of the embryonic stem cell research discussion comes from. Under Bush 43, with Tommy Thompson, former Wisconsin governor, as Secretary of Health and Human Services, there's a program where parents could adopt them and have them implanted and carry them to term. And then here's one of the products of that. This is a fertilized egg that could have been used in embryonic research. I happen to be a person who's a big proponent of embryonic stem cell research, but you can see how this issue, and there's Michael J. Fox, of course, who's constantly arguing that we need more investment in embryonic stem cell research to cure diseases like Parkinson's. And you can see how that issue can be looked at from different angles. Again, this wickedness. But this is why motivated reasoning is so important. And motivated reasoning we've known since the 80s, 90s. Basically, it says it's not about selective exposure. So it's not saying if you're a conservative, you're watching Fox News. If you're liberal, you're watching CNN. That is true, and I'll show you some data on that in a second. But what this says is, if we all agree that some facts are true, we all agree that there's no doubt, this whole room, all of us will still weigh more heavily, and this is what's called a confirmation bias, weigh more heavily those facts that fit what political scientists call our priors, our prior beliefs, our values, our ideologies, firmly held belief systems. So if a fact fits that, it has a higher chance of us using it in our decision making. If the fact doesn't fit that, it gets weighted down, disconfirmation bias. And the pernicious thing is the thing in the middle, biased assimilation. It basically says I'm assimilating reality into my worldview, not the other way around. Right? I should adjust my priors constantly. I have a certain worldview, new facts come in, I tweak that worldview. But that's not what happens. What happens is new facts come in, I tweak those facts to fit my worldview. That's what biased assimilation is all about, and ultimately it's about identity protection. And there's some research, especially by, or rather an argument by Jamie Druckman at Northwestern, where he's arguing that it's not just about identity protection. There may actually be more democratically consistent goals of accuracy motivations. I encourage you to read his work. It's really good stuff. Doesn't take away from the general idea, but it's a really good extension of the model. Either way, and this may be fine when we're having a discussion about abortion, when we're having a discussion about the impeachment, things that one can reasonably have different angles, where somebody can reasonably have different angles on the same topic. In science, this tends to become a problem because the same facts end up meaning different things to different people. The same science is going to be interpreted differently by different people. And that, of course, is antithetical of what science is all about, right? Some of you have seen this, but it's still a beautiful example because it points the spotlight nicely on us. and that is Wisconsin. We're, of course, convinced that we don't engage in any of these things and that we're usually right, and that might be true. But this is when Governor Walker, former Governor Walker, reallocated money that was part of the UW system to at least partly to build a new stadium, a new whatever that's called, for the Milwaukee Bucks. And ultimately, a lot of that money, or some of that money, also came from, or that was taken away, was money that was originally earmarked toward matching funds for DOE grants, other grants that were investing in biofuels. And a lot of us said, look, this makes no sense. You're taking away from a technology that we're researching that has huge potential to improve the economy of the state. This is going to be really important, bringing money to the Midwest. And so, ironically, we had a survey in the field at the time where we looked at on the why do citizens of Wisconsin see net benefits, positive net benefits that biofuels have on the state economy, or net negative benefits. And then we basically looked at what the information intake is. This is obviously just showing you the tip of the iceberg of a larger multivariate model. But for Democrats, the more information they get, the more excited they get about biofuels. And for Republicans, the more information they get, the less excited they get about biofuels. There's some selective exposure built in there, right? Because they may turn to different sources. But there's also lots of motivated reasoning. Two takeaways. One is the more information people get, the more polarized they get, which is consistent with every piece of research most pieces of research on motivated reasoning. So throwing more information at people, think back to knowledge deficit, right? Just giving people more information very often ends up polarizing. And takeaway number two, the most polarized are actually the most highly informed, not the least informed. It's not the people who are not paying attention, and if they just had the information, they wouldn't be polarized. No, the most polarized are the people who are highest. And Dan Kahan's work at Yale, everybody else that has worked in this field, shows pretty similar effects. So one of the questions, of course, that we asked, and this is actually work that we've done at Penn with Kathleen Hall-Jamieson, who just won the Public Service Medal of the National Academies a few days ago, and Nan Lee, who is going to be an assistant professor in the department in the fall, starting this fall. One of the things we wanted to figure out is, can we counter this? How do we get people to take information, even though it may contradict their priors, and not engage in this biased assimilation? And one thing that a lot of people point to is find a trusted messenger. So for climate change, conservative side, highly religious audiences, who is a trusted messenger? We had a perfectly naturally occurring kind of stimulus when Pope Francis came to the US, and right before coming to the US, had this encyclical letter in which he basically said, A, climate change is real, it's man-made, and we really need to do something about it. The science is settled, it's our fault, and we need to do something about it. Right? And so we're like, this is great. Finally, they're getting the message not from scientists, but they're getting the message from somebody who is a trusted source. Well, this is what happened. So this is survey data out of Penn, out of the Annenberg Public Policy Center. And we basically looked at, are people aware or unaware of the encyclical, so the red lines and the black lines. Are they strong liberals, strong conservatives? And then where is their concern related to climate change? And what we would assume is that the differences between conservatives and liberals become weaker once they become aware of the encyclical, right? Because now a credible messenger for a religious conservative community basically tells them, look, the science is settled, we should all in our community believe in it. But what you see is it actually gets worse. So these are people who didn't see the encyclical in red. These are the people who are aware of the encyclical. And the moment they find out, the process that we're trying to counter actually gets worse. So it's a completely counterintuitive finding. Same thing happens, by the way, for non-Catholics. So this is for Catholics, this is for non-Catholics. Exactly the same process. So what's happening there? And we don't have necessarily conclusive experimental evidence, but we have some circumstantial evidence when we look at the same thing, but dependent variable now, is the Pope a credible messenger on climate? And again, aware, unaware. And so the unaware, basically there's a split with conservatives thinking a little bit less than Democrats that the Pope is a credible messenger. But once they read the encyclical, they actually, the Democrats think the Pope is, are more likely to think that the Pope is credible, and the conservatives are less likely to think. So in other words, what I do when I get a credible messenger that tells me something I don't want to hear about climate, I adjust my views on the messenger before I adjust my view on climate. That's how deeply ingrained that motivated reasoning and prior processing is, right? I'd rather change my views on the Pope than to change my views on climate change, because that is more threatening. Changing my views on climate change would be more threatening to my political identity, and again, for non-Catholics, it's even a little bit more pronounced. But that's one potential explanation of what's going on there. And it shows you how deeply ingrained, for all of us, those processes end up being. None of this is helped by the information environment that we're in. Many of you have now heard again and again about algorithms as editors, so the idea that when Laura Helmuth was here on campus a couple of years ago, she spoke to this repeatedly, the idea that for the Washington Post, for instance, and for any major newspaper, articles that go online are immediately real-time A/B tested, different headlines, different leads, go in within the first 15 minutes, social engagement, sharing, all social traffic gets assessed, and then whatever is most successful and does well socially ends up being the headline and the lead that they go with, and determine placement and other things. So in other words, we're getting news that we want and that really fits our preferences, rather than news that editorially maybe is something that we should be reading about. Why is that so important, of course? Because now we have 7 to 8 people out of 10 who routinely get their news from Facebook, Twitter, other social media feeds. So we're increasingly shifting, I'll show you a graph in a second, toward news diets that are no longer what used to be broadcasting, right? We take news and we send it to all Americans, but that are narrowcast, that are basically taking the full news environment and they're curated and tailored, not toward segments, that's always happened, but toward individuals, where none of our feeds will look the same in this room. Even if we had the same followers and would follow the same people on Twitter or had the same friends on Facebook or whatever else, we would still get different feeds based on the hardware, the location, the hardware we're using, the location, our prior behaviors, our social networks, and so on and so forth. So none of these results are objectively true or real or shared anymore. They're tailored on any platform toward our needs. And you can see how that relates to us seeking information that fits our priors. And this is where we're going. This is, for those of you who haven't seen this, you should look at these reports. The Reuters, Oxford Reuters Institute, they're very descriptive. They're not explanatory, but they're actually a good gauge every year of where we are worldwide on social media use. This past year, the most recent report, they did this new graph, which I really like, the way it's ordered. The depressing part, and I said this in a talk at WIT before, is this, right, that everybody over 35 is old, so this touches some of you in here, some of us. But the more important part is, what I like is they split this basically into, on the right, they don't call it that, but these are all traditional ways of using news, right? You go directly to the New York Times, you subscribe, you whatever, you get news alerts on your phone. These are all pull things, or aggregators. You use Apple News, you use Feedly, whatever else. But these are basically things where you pull news. It's up to you. The agency is with you. This is all push. This is all algorithmically. Instagram and Facebook, which of course is more or less the same thing, Twitter and other social media platforms. So this is all algorithmic, which means this is you getting tailored feeds. And you can literally see the red lines, right, dominate on this end, and the blue lines dominate on this end. Which means generationally, we're shifting where this group will literally die out. I mean, again, 35 plus, we'll have some buffer. But it's not going to be the future. The future is here. The future is tailored news that exacerbates what I just showed you, human nature. It just basically puts what we see for human nature on steroids. As if that wasn't bad enough, this is where scientists come in. And mostly scientists that don't pay attention to the social science, which is also science, but for some scientists it's not. Michael Mann being a really good example. If you actually go to Google Scholar, Michael Mann lists as one of his 5 areas science communication. He has won the AAAS award for public engagement. Michael Mann is a climate scientist at Penn State and routinely tweets that everybody who's a Republican is not safe to have in Congress. Republicans are idiots because they don't believe in climate change. If you want to connect with Republicans on climate change, opening with that line is not going to work. And that's not even communication science, that's just reasonable common sense, right? Doesn't stop him, though. He still thinks he's a really good communicator because, of course, he loves talking within the echo chamber. Richard Dawkins, and I don't really have to say a lot about somebody who calls everybody who is religious, somebody who is, follows the spaghetti monster, and mocks everybody who has any concern about embryonic research. Again, religiously or from a religious or non-religious perspective, I'm exactly where he is. I mean, maybe not quite as atheist as he is, But I know where he's coming from. I understand from an intellectual perspective where he's coming from, but this is bad communication. And then I'm going to use Neil deGrasse Tyson again as an example. And I know I showed this in 902 at least this past year, who on Christmas Day posts this. Basically a funny joke about Isaac Newton, who was born on December 25, 1642. On this day, a long time ago, he was born. Congratulations or happy birthday, Isaac Newton. Funny, but trolling Christians on Christmas is not going to be the way where I'm basically saying our values, hey, you, general public, maybe religious public, our values align. In fact, this is saying our values don't align. Right? I think it's funny to make jokes about somebody else on Christmas. Totally unnecessary, totally gratuitous, and certainly not something where we're ultimately connecting with these audiences on a value basis. To hammer that point or to drive that point home, this is data that Matt Nisbet has collected at Northeastern as part of a climate shift report, and where he basically plots, putting together different surveys, here on an ideology scale, liberal conservative, and here on a partisan ID scale, Republican and Democrat, and he places these different groups. Down here you have New York Times readers, Daily Show viewers, CNN viewers, MSNBC, and AAAS members. Members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. These are not just scientists, these are science teachers, educators, people who have an affinity for science overall. But you can see where they're sitting, right? In that Democrat, liberal, pretty far window. In fact, they're sitting so far left that they almost mirror perfectly Tea Party members, Mormon Church members, Fox News viewers, and evangelicals, right? So, and again, this is not the group that has found the light and this one hasn't, or vice versa. It simply says they're ideologically almost as far apart as you possibly can on this grid, with the general public sitting here. So again, the distances are not that different, and signaling that our values don't align across a pretty wide rift already is a general problem. So let me spend a little bit of time on pathways forward, and I do want to end with enough time to chat a little bit more. For A, I've now said information doesn't matter, and that's A, not true. Information is important. Teaching is important. Scientific facts are important. I'll come back to this in the very end. So I want to make that clear. But also, we know from decades and decades of research that sometimes the outcomes we're trying to achieve have nothing to do with communication. They have something to do with behavior change. This is one example, a letter that I keep getting about voting and how my neighbors voted and how much I've voted. When I say I keep getting it, I don't keep getting this graph. I usually get the graph that looks the other way around, saying you haven't voted enough and your neighbors vote more. Why is that? Because we know that most of us do stuff not because we know better or because there's information about it, but because everybody else does it. Fashion is a great example, right? We constantly change what we wear and what's normal and what's appropriate because everybody else does it. There's no rational reason for this whatsoever, why jeans are skinnier or wider or lower or high-rise or whatever else. There's no reason. The only reason is that one does that now. If I want to get people to do certain things like voting, like recycling, we know that social norms are a hugely important thing. So do I give people more information? No, I simply tell them what everybody else does, and then hopefully they change their behavior. Really good example also this, for those of you who are in men's bathrooms on a more regular basis. Let me just blow this up. One of the most successful behavior change campaigns, right? Partly because males are a bit more unidimensional in their decision making, I guess. I have no idea. But so if you go to Amsterdam, there's a little fly there. If you go to Santa Monica, there's a little shell there. And basically what guys do apparently is pee on that shell, and that minimizes splashage. So you basically have the cleanest bathroom simply by putting this little thing there and conditioning behavior. I've said this before elsewhere. I don't know where people have studied this or which master's student in fluid mechanics did that as their master's thesis. But it, again, shows that heuristics and shortcuts drive our behavior all the time. And sometimes outcomes that are behaviorally, we want that. Same thing for vaccinations, for other things. It's not about explaining. It's about changing behavior and settled science. Number two is I think we have a huge enterprise, and a good one, and many people in this room work in this enterprise, and that is creating events on campus, off campus, where people come and connect with science. And that's good to some degree, but these if you build it, they will come approaches are only useful to a point. In fact, I would argue we need to take our science communication where people are. And I want to put out the idea that most of us learn about most science not from news, from universities, from anything that's explicitly related to science. Most of us heard about nanotechnology not from Nature magazine, not from Scientific American, not from Nova Science, not from an engagement event at WIT or MIR, but they saw Terminator. And that's where nanoscience first came up, or they read a comic book. They didn't hear about the dangers of cloning or of gene editing from some scientific article or some science journalist, but most likely they watched Orphan Black. Luke Cage, before he got canceled, was CRISPR edited. Designated Survivor used CRISPR edited biological agents for killing off certain parts of the population, racially motivated. And then, of course, and this is the most important one, this is what most of us think a scientist looks like, to just give that away. Sheldon Cooper, theoretical physicist, right? Nobody has ever seen a theoretical physicist at work. Doc from Back to the Future. Why is that so important? 1970s, cultivation theory in communication has been around forever. It basically says your views of reality are conditioned by streams of entertainment media. If you can't observe reality, you take your cues from what reality looks like, from what you constantly see in media portrayals. 2020, 2019, wherever we are, I teach a class, 120 students, 150 students, depending on the year. Students who work in labs, who are pre-med, who are social scientists, who are political scientists, who are biologists, who are geneticists, who are law students sometimes. And I asked them as an attendance quiz, give me 5 terms that describe in your mind a typical scientist. This is what the word cloud looks like. Right? And this is people in a university. And they go like, no, that's not true. This is misleading. Wording this year was off, and that was last year, and that was the year before, and that was the year before that. Right? It always comes out exactly the same way. And all of us would probably pick similar terms. You know, the nerdy, the lab coat, the glasses, the white hair, the crazy hair, and so on and so forth. There's layers of problems built into this as far as gender, race, and other things go, and general nerdiness. But the issue is that's where we take our cues. And I just want to show you one example of somebody who has who has worked about this on this problem for a long time. Barbara Klein-Pope, who runs the Johns Hopkins University Press now, but was director of communications for the National Academies in D.C. for a long time, and she started or helped start this thing called the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And what that is it's basically located in L.A. It's a partnership between the academies and Hollywood to change how Hollywood talks about scientists, broadly construed. Exactly the problem that I just showed you with the word clouds. This is one example, Kenneth Branagh, director of Thor, and one of the things that happened when they did Thor is that, of course, this is what the comic book looks like. And this is what Natalie Portman's role eventually, for those of you who haven't seen or have seen the movie, look like, right? So there's a bunch of males that are scientists, doctors, and then she was playing a nurse in the comic book. So you already see where kind of the fairly traditional gender distributions and hierarchies came in. And Barbara was like, we can't do this. We can't, repeat this one more time. And so the Science and Entertainment Exchange basically worked with the creators of Thor and the writers to change her role from a nurse into a physicist. So Natalie Portman became a physicist. She became a real scientist. And this has nothing to do with nursing. It simply has something to do with the relative perceptions within this, and this was one of the movie posters. Natalie Portman, the woman of science in Thor. So the same mechanism, in other words, that produce some of these undesirable effects end up also being really good levers for creating change, and levers, as I said, that operate not where universities are, not at a festival, not at something where people come to us, but actually when they're sitting at home on their couch and they're watching a movie that they're not watching because they care about science, but it's a movie that they're watching maybe because they don't care about science. Last thing I want to say is and this is something that a lot of our work deals with, how do we come back to productive disagreement? I think this country has unlearned, if that's possible, to talk to each other in a productive way. And a lot of the things that I talked about are reasons for that. And I want to highlight a few of them. I told you earlier I would come back to this. This is fairly new data. A few days ago, when you look at liberals and conservatives and what they turn to, which sources they trust the most. So liberals, you have 7 out of 10 liberals or 2 out of 3, 66% turning to CNN and the New York Times. And on the conservative side, you have the exact same thing with Fox News and Hannity on radio, which of course he also has a show on Fox News. So you have a split that's not even a little bit subtle. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And then you flip it around, what they trust or don't trust is exactly the opposite, right? So Fox News and Limbaugh, Democrats just don't actively distrust, and then CNN and MSNBC, CNN and MSNBC on the other side. So we all have our own bubbles, but we also distrust the other bubble. It's not just that we are in a bubble, we're also going the other bubble is bad. And this is the kicker, when you ask people if they want to talk to the other side, you actually see that some of the strongest reluctance and uneasiness to talk to the other side is actually the Democratic side. There's a little bit of an ironic element to that, because Democrats, of course, are the ones that want to hear all opinions and everybody should be included in everything, except for when it's the other side. Then we feel a little bit uneasy about this. And it's literally built into your ideology. You should be listening to the other side. And I think there's good reasons why they may not want to. I'm not belittling those reasons. I'm just saying that's a real problem. And it's a problem that comes out again and again and again. And since Dominique is not here, you get a big picture of her and of Mike Zenos, who are co-PIs on this grant, where we're trying, this is an NSF grant that we're currently working on to depolarize discussions about emerging technologies like CRISPR, so these new types of genome editing techniques that allow us to make modifications fairly easily and in fairly transformative ways if they get passed on to future generations, so if they're made to the human germline. And one of the things that we do in this, and this is pilot data a little bit older, but hopefully we just collected the first wave of human genome editing, and we're doing GMOs right now. But what we do is we basically put students at this stage in a lab setting, tell them, read about these technologies. Afterwards, we're going to make you talk to different groups. Either we don't tell them that they have to talk, or we tell them that they will talk to people that agree with them, talk to people that disagree with them, or just talk to people without telling them if they're going to agree or disagree. So we basically threaten them with discussion. Threat is the wrong verb here, but whatever. You already saw that, that the uneasiness that comes with it. And then we tell them, go off and before that discussion, before we ask you a few more questions, look for information, or you can read up on the topic. We give them a gated information environment that basically allows them to look up articles, same number of articles that are general news, that are science, basically a normal science story, or that show both sides of the issue, kind of the op-eds. And here's the interesting thing. Simply getting the thread of a discussion that you never have to have. We actually make them do the discussion so they don't go off and tell other undergrads that they never had to do the discussion, so that they don't give away the kicker. But that's the only reason they have. We don't care about the discussion at all. We just care about the threat. Those that are threatened with discussion, much more likely to turn to the two-sided information, right? Read the other side of the story than the people who don't have the discussion thread. And the highest percentage of those going to two-sided are the ones who know that they will have to talk to the other side. So meaning who will have opposing discussions. There are multiple interpretations for this. One of them is that we just collect ammunition to convince the other side, right? I don't want to look like an idiot. So I'm reading up on the other side. That may be a bad motivation, or democratically not the ideal motivation, but it's still a good outcome. I'm still reading what other people have to say. Or the other thing is that I really do want to know and be ready for a fairly balanced discussion of both sides of the issue. Either way, there'll be more to report on this hopefully soon, and especially in how we can then counter some of those mechanisms, how to get people to engage more in this kind of work. Phil Tetlock and others at Penn are working on the same issue, so it's actually a growing group of people who are working on the same problem. You will hear eventually from Elizabeth Christofferson, who together with at the Rita Allen Foundation, who together with Brooke Smith, who is the director for public engagement at the Kavli Foundation in LA, and myself, we wrote a piece on what we call the civic science imperative. And in that piece, we basically argued what we need is a shift away from these engagement models that bring people to universities, and a shift toward science contributing to these large societal discussions as one partner among many, because many of the answers, remember I started out with that, are not going to be scientific. They're going to be political. They're going to be moral. They will require those debates, but they require those debates with the best available science informing those debates. Since then, there's lots of partners that have come on, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Gordon Beatty Moore, Boris Wellcome, Lots of others. Emily Howell, who's a postdoc in our department, is coordinating the curriculum for all of the fellows that are sitting at places like WGBH in Boston. So they're scientists working with public television. Or they're sitting at the Association for Cell Biology, and they're working with bench scientists to help them with associations to rethink their scientific enterprise, their science communication enterprise. The idea is, can we create systems change and build a cohort of the next thinkers in this field? And can we do that with a heavy, heavy investment from philanthropy? In about 2 weeks, we're meeting at the Gates Foundation in Seattle to have the first meeting of all the different fellows that are sitting all over the country. So it's a really exciting project, and by the time Elizabeth comes here, I think she will tell you some of the outcomes. She will probably present with Emily Howell. This is the general idea, the overview. This is where we've always been, and this is kind of ironic since this is exactly what I'm doing. I stand here, I lecture to you. But it's basically saying this is the knowledge deficit that I just told you doesn't work, that I've now exercised for 45 minutes. It's basically scientists know what's right. They communicate the science to other people. And that works really well for science that is settled, right? Vaccines are safe and so on and so forth. There's no debate to be had. There's no debate yet one more time if climate change is real or not. We replaced that with dialogue and engagement models, and I said here communication about science. This is the Alan Leshner model, but it still very often happens in scientific settings. It happens on our turf, on our terms. We determine the questions. We're going to close our lab if we're being told in a public engagement exercise we shouldn't do this kind of work. The outcomes are still fairly constrained in what we're willing to engage in, and so on. What we call the culture of civic science is basically those new problems. Stem cell was a really good example. Embryonic stem cell was a really good example. I think CRISPR is another really good example. AI will be that, where we will have broad debates that will involve regulation and banning certain areas of research. It will happen in certain communities and in certain areas. The tricky part is, how do we get the best available science heard in those debates? Because science is not going to lead those debates, and science is not going to be the only contributor to those debates. Most certainly, we're not going to be the arbiters. And so these ethical, regulatory, political questions that science cannot answer, but needs to make sure are informed by the best available science. I think this is where the tricky part comes in, and why this culture of civic science with all hands on deck from different communities, bench science, social science, and media, are so fundamentally important. Toward that end, I'll do one pitch. If you're a bench scientist and you haven't thought about our PhD minor, I know many of you are. By all means, you should consider doing that. Wisconsin, as you know, is one of the few places that has transcriptable PhD minors in the country. So you can actually literally get a PhD minor in, I was always convinced that it ends up on your diploma, but I was told it doesn't on your diploma, right, Julia? No. So yeah, it will not end up on your diploma, it will end up on your transcript. But I told people in the past. And then the second thing is the standing committee that I mentioned earlier. The National Academies has created a standing committee for communicating science, effectively advancing science communication research and practice, has on it people, Laura Helmuth from the Washington Post, who I mentioned earlier with the A/B testing, people from the medicine field of medicine, public health, science communication, political communication, and then lots of communities of practice, museums, and so on and so forth. And the next special issue of PNAS of our first meeting will come out. The resources here, special issues of PNAS based on 3 colloquia from the National Academies, all publicly available, that summarize a lot of the work better than I just did. A report that we did for the Academies, Communicating Science Effectively, that Alan Leshner chaired, and the handbook, Science of Science Communication, that I will encourage you to get, but I will not mention the link while we're taping. And so once we're done taping, I'll tell you how to get that book. And that's it, and hopefully I left enough time for discussion. Awesome, thank you.